Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Kirsten Stringer. I'm the editorial manager here at Rewild. Today I'm chatting with my friend Justin West, who is the CEO and co-founder of ThriveLot, about planting wildly and all of the ways that you can start to rewild your life. So, what do you think people would be most surprised to learn about their lawns?
Hmm. Um, so we actually see this every day. Um, People are really surprised to learn that typically they don't actually have soil, first of all, underneath that green carpet. We talk to people daily that say, "Oh, what a great idea! I really wish I could have that, but I tried to grow something one time and it didn't live because my soil is bad." Soil is not bad. You don't actually have soil in most suburban, urban, even some rural areas around where houses have been constructed, because the first step in the construction process is to actually scrape off the topsoil. And the topsoil is where things have been living and dying and living on top of that and building this depth of what in soil science is called organic matter. And so the organic matter is really what makes soil. It's what feeds plants. Most homes do not have any food for plants around them. And so then that is why the next thing I think that people would be surprised by is that most turf grasses are really invasive, meaning that they will crowd out native plants, that they will escape into the wild, that they are hardy and aggressive, and can reproduce like wildfire, literally, and are really damaging a lot of our wild spaces, a lot of our national parks, a lot of our fragile ecosystems. But the reason that so many landscaping plants, including turf grass, are typically these hardy invasives is because there's not soil. And so the landscaping industry has created products that will kind of live anywhere, that are super hardy. You stick it on some clay and you hit it with some water every once in a while and it's going to live. You put it down green side up and it's going to grow. Unfortunately, that convenience, like it so often does, is creating a pretty high price in the long term, and really damaging a lot of ecosystems. So I think that's the other piece that people will be surprised by, is that a lot of the things that they see, even things that we think are good, like a butterfly bush, butterfly bush is actually super invasive and is not from North America. And it will escape into the wild and it will crowd out native plants. And while it does feed butterflies and hummingbirds with its nectar, it doesn't actually have any food. It doesn't actually have any habitat and food for the caterpillars. So butterflies really need native plants that they can not only eat the nectar of, but that they can lay their eggs on, so that when the eggs hatch into caterpillars, the caterpillars can eat the leaves. And so that's just one of the many things that native plants bring to the table. So no soil, invasive species, and then probably along with the no soil thing is I've noticed a real surprise and a lack of understanding around water conservation and soil, and the fact that carbon. So again, we talked about soil organic matter. All organic matter, all life on the planet is carbon and typically water. And the reason is that the carbon molecule sticks to water molecules. And so when you have a lot of organic matter in the soil, it's like a sponge. It sticks to water and it holds a lot of water. And you've probably experienced this if you've gone out in the woods in the drought in the middle of summer and dug down through the leaves, and you don't have to go too far and it's wet. And that's because there's a lot of organic matter holding water. So I think a lot of people will be surprised that if they just built up the organic matter in their soil, and a lot of city managers and municipalities would be surprised to learn that even more powerful than not building patios and driveways is that if they would start to actually develop soil, they'd have a lot fewer problems with runoff. And that the solution to erosion is not putting a bunch of gravel on the spot that's eroding. It's actually building the soil and a root mass to hold that erosion.
If somebody wants to rewild their yard, what is the first thing that they should do?
So the first thing that they should do is start to build soil And the easy way to do that is just to start to keep organic matter on your property. So if you mow the lawn, or if you have somebody mow the lawn, and they're bagging the grass clippings, keep those. don't let them take those away. When you rake the leaves, rake those up in a pile. If you can chop them up, it's even better. Those will break down, and you can spread them back out, and you can build soil. Keep your food waste for compost. Get a compost kit, or sign up for a compost company in your area and have them bring you that the composted waste back. But the first thing you want to do is start to build soil. And then the reason is because ultimately you want to replace your invasive species with native species. And native species need soil. They're not invasive. They're not as hardy and aggressive as the invasive species. And so you're going to have to take that subsoil that is most yards in the US and put some food on it so that native plants can actually survive and thrive.
So weeds get a bad reputation. Let's talk about that. What's going on?
So a weed is just a plant whose benefits are not well understood. Every plant has a purpose. Invasive plants typically have a great purpose, usually on the other side of the world where they came from. There's usually things over there that eat them, right? And other plants that they co-evolved with. But every plant has a purpose. And so when we're talking about weeds, we do want to think about native weeds versus invasive weeds. Native weeds are usually really good and have a purpose. Most things that we think of as weeds are really just a sign that the soil needs something, that the soil is unhealthy. Ecosystem designers call them pioneer species. And there are pioneer species that are, the little plants or even the big plants that grow up 3 to 5 feet that are herbaceous, right? That are just green. They make crazy flowers sometimes that make you sneeze. But weeds, weeds or pioneer species actually go all the way up to trees. So there's this concept in ecology called succession. And succession basically goes from bare ground to mature forest. And so there's this idea that's kind of anthropomorphic, that Mother Nature is always trying to cover herself, right? Bare ground will always eventually turn into a forest. Even stone mountains, given enough time, turns into a forest. And what actually happens with that is that, like I kind of talked about earlier, that every plant has its ecological niche. Well, some plants really thrive in disturbed and damaged soils. And most of those are the ones that we call weeds. So goldenrod and bull thistle and dandelions, some that a lot of people know. And those really thrive on damaged and bare soil. Again, with most of our construction and a lot of the things that we do chemically in areas where people live, almost all of our soil is disturbed and needs help. And so when you see weeds, what that is nature is trying to inject life into that soil. And most weeds are really, people think they're tough to deal with because they put down these big tap roots. And what that actually is the plant punching life down into hard, compact soil. And those plants are ultimately going to die and rot. And they might go through a couple seasons of that, but they're going to die and rot and turn that hard, compact soil into more and more rich soil with more and more organic matter. And as there's more organic matter, all of a sudden, there are other native plants that will come along that will crowd those weeds out. And so anyways, that's succession. I think, so one, look at weeds as telling you where the soil needs help, where the soil needs health, where you need to add some organic matter to the soil. And also learn about weeds. There's so many weeds that are just incredible, medicinal, edible. In the permaculture world, it's how you think about dandelions is sometimes considered like a scale on how tuned in you are. And so, there's the majority of the population that's like, ew, dandelions, spray it with poison, right? Get it out of here. And then And then way over on the other side of the spectrum are the people who are actually breeding dandelions for like yield and taste, because the roots are incredibly medicinal for teas. The leaves are delicious for salads, and super antioxidant rich. And even the seed pods and the flowers have really beneficial uses. So yeah, weeds can be your friend. You just have to understand them better and know why they're there.
I was gonna ask you if we can eat them, so that's great. You already answered that question. You anticipated it before I asked it.
Yeah, don't eat all of them, and be very careful when foraging. But yes, there are some that are wonderful.
What do thriving and rewilded yards have to do with food security?
Mm. Um, yeah, a wild yard, a native yard can also be an edible yard, and very often is an edible yard. Um, here in North America, in the United States, indigenous peoples lived here for thousands, potentially tens of thousands of years before the arrival of European settlers. And they cultivated and worked with their ecosystems to produce, or to encourage things that they could eat. They didn't plow big fields, but they did scatter seeds, and they did help things to live and to grow together, and put the right plant in the right place. So there are so many native beneficial plants that feed butterflies and birds and bees that also have berries and fruit and tubers, which are tubers like a potato, um, tubers and leaves and flowers that we can either eat, or that we can boil into tea, that we can squeeze into essential oils, that we have amazing uses for. And so we like to think that a wild biodiverse ecosystem is also edible. And if we're really going to rewild our lives, and we're really going to think about our impact on the planet, we've got to consider our supply chains. And in the modern world, our food on average travels 1,500 miles. On average, there's 13 calories of energy, typically, petrochemical energy, that's burned to produce that food and get it to us. That food is very often soaked in pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, because it's grown in a linear industrial monocrop, which is not natural. And so you actually have to fight nature on all fronts to grow things that way. And so having a living ecosystem, having a rewilded yard, is a really critical part to play in approaching our footprint, because we like to think that every thriving lot means that a little piece of industrial agriculture and a truck on the road and a refrigerator that was manufactured and is sucking energy every day to store food, a little bit of those things disappear, because we can get the food right out of our yard. And we're more resilient for it. We're more healthy for it. I could go on for days on how the food that is produced and transported is the plants have been bred for yield and shelf life and pest resistance, not for taste or human human health. And so there's a genetic thing going on there. And also they're typically picked well before their peak ripeness and their peak nutrition. Whereas if you have food growing in your yard, you can really change that. And anybody that eats at a high end, like farm to table restaurant, or that has grown food themselves, knows the difference between that tomato from the Walmart produce aisle and the tomato coming out of the yard. It's a radically different feeling.
How does rewilding your yard help the earth?
Mm-hmm. Rewilding your yard helps the earth by transforming a space that formerly had and supported very, very small amount of life into supporting a deeper and deeper density of life. Do a Google search for the root systems of native plant species. So many of these beautiful flowering native plant species put their roots down many, many feet into the earth, and create food for living things in the earth. So bacteria, healthy bacteria, good bacteria, the soil is the gut of the earth, earthworms, insects in the ground, And then that creates this whole web of life, including birds and bees and butterflies, and ultimately up into trees and the things that we can see. And so if you've got a typical yard, there's really very little life on it. It might even be green. It might even look lush and green, nice green carpet. The turf grass roots are really, really short. And they're typically there's only subsoil there. There's no soil. So there's no life deepening. And no birds eat anything from the turf grass. No bees get any food. No butterflies get any food. And so whenever you rewild your yard, you're actually expanding the life on your property. And on an environmental level, that is literally transforming carbon in the air into living things. That is literally storing carbon into these beautiful and beneficial things all around you. And that is also, if you're producing food, that is making a little bit of your footprint of the things that you eat, the fields that you eat from, the transportation, the emissions, the chemicals. It's making a little bit of that go away and disappear. It's making your neighbors healthier. It's keeping water on your property. It's keeping water in the soil instead of it just rushing downstream to the ocean. And so what that's actually doing is meaning that water is released and transpired into the air more, which will reduce drought in downwind areas. So it's actually changing the macroclimate downwind. It's also changing the microclimate in that your home and your area is going to be cooler. There's countless studies done on the cooling effects of having trees in cities and in suburban areas. And so the shade of a tree creates a microclimate, both in shade and blocking the sunlight, and in humidity and holding water in the soil and in the living tree. And I I don't think those are even all of the things that you do for the environment. But you cool it down, you make it live, you make it thrive, and you yourself stand to benefit immensely.
Great answer. You're so eloquent.
Thank you. I don't feel like it. I really appreciate that.
You are. Don't worry about it. Okay, so that was my last question. I guess is there anything you would like to add? Anything that we should have touched on and we didn't?
I do want to touch on our commitment to access and equity in the world, just for us specifically as a company. I know this is less about just kind of the ecological and environmental impacts, but the Thrive Lot is a business, is a startup, but we're a public benefit corporation for a reason, because today, getting someone to, first of all, the knowledge to turn your yard into a wild ecosystem and a beneficial ecosystem is really hard. And then to be able to pay someone to do that is still really expensive. We're building the technology and the industry to bring that expense down. But along with that, we also recognize that there are communities that are underserved that really need the health and the psychological benefits of being surrounded by fruit trees and native plants and bees and birds and butterflies more than anyone. And so we're really committed to building out the systems, whether that's through a foundation or what, to use a portion of our profits and also to bring in grants and to bring in resources to contribute to growing truly sustainable food and rewilding food deserts and underserved communities across the world. I think that's something that's really important to us that I want to make sure we share.
Thank you. I'm glad that you added that. It's really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoy talking to you too.
Yes. So thank you so much.
I learned so much. I mean, like, because we touched on things that I know, but like we went so deep, and I was like, wow, like, gosh, there's so much still to learn for me.
If you dig this stuff and you want to go deeper, there's a book called Gaia's Garden, GAIA' Garden. And that is my favorite book to recommend to people. It is just technical and nerdy enough that you can actually take that book and like go to work with it. But it is also approachable enough in that it's like it's approachable enough that you can read it cover to cover.
Okay.
It's just interesting. It has stories and examples, and so it's a nice balance between like um, digestible and useful.
Even if it wasn't approachable, I never met a book I was scared of.
Awesome. I
Like,
love that. Same
yeah,
here.
like I will read it. It's
Same here.
okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to keep you for any more of your time, but thank you so much for how much time you did give to me.
Yeah. Anything else that you need, that you want, that I can help with, I'm happy to step out and shoot content, jump into another one of these anytime. Whatever I can do to help. That's my job. So hit me up.
Very excited.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.